Ram will return to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026. Honda could also be joining NASCAR in the not-so-distant future, and 23M Racing and Farmer Motorsports could lose their charters after the judges' decisions. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and our Motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is William Byron's 2026 Form Energy scheme that we'll see in a couple races in 2026. This was at an event that was happening in St. Louis that was revealed. I gotta say, this car looks really solid. I think they knocked this one out of the park. I like the colors on it, and it's really exciting to see that Budweiser and Busch are getting involved with another sponsorship with Anheuser. Really exciting stuff. The car also looks really good. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Rosch Chastain's 2025 Wendy's scheme that we'll see this weekend at Mexico City. This kind of got leaked. This looks really awesome in my opinion. I love the colors on it. It kind of looks very similar to the one I think Daniel Suarez had earlier this year, I think at Daytona, I'm pretty sure. This one looks really good. I think they knocked this one out of the park. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Mexico City. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Michigan Cup race. Now, yesterday on Saturday, Chase Briscoe, of course, won his third straight pole of 2025. But he also broke the record for the fastest speed in the next-gen era at this track with a 195.514 mile an hour lap. That is the fastest next-gen pole, and that is the fastest lap we have seen since 2018 when Ryan Blaney had an over 200 mile an hour lap at Texas Motor Speedway. The laps are continuing to get very much quicker with the next-gen car, and I think down the road, if the speeds continue at the trajectory they're going, I could definitely see the number getting close to 200 miles an hour. So these cars are getting faster and faster. If they were going as quick as they were, if they go to 200, they're going to be going like 35-second laps, which would be incredible. I love to see those numbers back up to where they were like in 2014, but unless I think this is a really big deal that the number continues to go up. I'd love to see over 200 miles an hour down the road, but I think we're headed toward a great direction on that front. I love that we're seeing increases in the speeds, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the truck race from Michigan. As there was a report by the Craftsman Truck Series account yesterday that the Truck Series race in Michigan has broken a new record. They had 278 miles on the distance all around by the end of the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race. This is now the longest truck race by distance in Craftsman Truck Series history. That is a huge number. Obviously, the event was 250 miles originally, but of course, they had a couple overtimes because a lot of crashes happened near the end of the event, where a lot of really good cars like Carson Osbar and Corey Heim and Rosch Chastain and Gio Ruggiero all got taken out in crashes and incidents during the event. To nearly have 300 miles in a truck race, so it's kind of wild to me. Yes, you've seen 300 on a number for trucks, but that's the laps. They've never seen it like be miles perhaps. So this is a big number for the truck series. I think down the road we could see a 300-mile truck series race. I think that'd be really interesting. We broke the record. Not a record you really want to break in all honesty doing that, but over 278 miles is a big record for the series, in my honest opinion. It's a big deal for the truck series. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stuart Fzen. Now, Stuart Fzen, of course, won the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race this past weekend at Michigan International Speedway. With him winning, he snapped a 72-race winless streak going all the way back to 2022 when he won at Texas Motor Speedway in April. This is now the second driver who's had 70-plus race winless streak who's been able to snap it. Remember, earlier this year, which was about a month or so ago, back around like late April, we saw Tyler Ankrum snap a winless streak that goes all the way back to Kentucky from 2019. Stuart Fzen put himself in the right position and right time to get up there and take the win in victory, and to see him snap a winless streak is really impressive. Stuart Fzen has had an up and down year. He kind of talked about the fact he wasn't even sure if he wanted to continue racing in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series after all the struggles he had. So I think it's impressive to see him break that winless streak. Maybe on the Cup side, we'll see Kyle Busch do that maybe this weekend in Mexico. Who knows at this point, but pretty impressive to see Stuart Fzen break his own record and snap a 72-race winless streak. Good to see him go back to victory lane after some struggles in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RFK Racing. As reported by the NASCAR Inside Counts earlier this evening, that RFK Racing had 3 cars finish inside the top 10 in the Cup Series race at Michigan. This is the first time since July 2016 at Daytona during the summer race at Daytona where all 3 of the RFK cars finished inside the top 10. Of course, we saw Chris Buescher finish second, Ryan Preece finished ninth, and Brad Keselowski finished 10th. RFK Racing this year has really built up an organization that has been showing a lot more speed and a lot more pace this season. And they've had a lot of speed. I know Brad struggled this year when it comes to it, but the last couple weeks, I think that 6 car has been a little bit faster. Brad's been starting to get a lot better finishes as of late. I think about Ryan Preece. He's been super consistent so far at times throughout 2025. And I also think about Chris Buescher. He's had a lot of speed. He even got a penalty, and he still has recovered to be 20 points above the cutoff line going to a type of track where he's generally been really good. Good to see RFK continuing to grow their platform and getting better as an organization. They've been showing some good speed. Good to see all 3 of the cars finish inside the top 10. Really impressive from this organization. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. With Denny Hamlin winning the NASCAR Cup Series race this past weekend at Michigan International Speedway, he has scored his 57th career NASCAR Cup Series win. He is now only the 10th driver to have won with over 700 starts in the NASCAR Cup Series, but not only that, he is now the all-time winningest driver in Joe Gibbs Racing history NASCAR Cup competition. Remember, Kyle Busch had 56 wins in the NASCAR Cup Series before Denny Hamlin got those numbers. For, of course, Kyle Busch left to go over to Richard Childress Racing. And now you've got Denny Hamlin, who's broke the all-time record. You could probably make the argument at this point that Denny Hamlin might be the best driver in Joe Gibbs Racing history. Yes, he never won a championship for them, but he's been consistently a winner on a year-by-year basis outside of 2018. And Denny Hamlin seems to be getting better as he gets older. It's been so impressive to see what Denny Hamlin's been able to accomplish this year. We weren't even sure if he and Chris Gale were really going to gel together in 2025, but they both have worked together exceptionally so far this year. It's been super impressive. They've both been really strong, been really fast so far this season. I think that's going to continue, and I do think there's a really good chance and possibility that we could see Denny Hamlin have an opportunity to win the championship. We'll see if that truly ends up happening, but nonetheless, really good for Hamlin. Congratulations to him on winning his 57th career NASCAR Cup Series race. I think he might have a chance to get 60 before the end of the year with the speed he's showing. Really impressed with the speed that he's showing currently at this particular moment. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Louvers. Now, there's going to be some changes for the Louvers in the upcoming NASCAR Cup Series race at Mexico City. According to Bob Pockrass and many other reporters in the industry, each manufacturer will decide on a cooling system after the first practice takes place on Friday afternoon around 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at Mexico City. All 3 manufacturers will get the chance and opportunity. The reason is because of the higher elevation. They're very worried that with the higher altitudes, there's a really good chance and possibility that the engines might end up blowing up a lot more. We might have some motor issues in the event. Because of this, there is a very good chance and possibility that horsepower is going to be down, because from what a lot of people have been saying, the higher the altitude is and the higher the elevation is, with this going over 7,000 feet above sea level, with the higher elevation, the less horsepower you're going to have. I think someone mentioned for every 100 feet, you lose 3 horsepower. So we can lose up to 150 horsepower when we do get to the racetrack this weekend at Mexico City. And I think open up these Louvers will create some of those things where the cooling can come into effect. What this is also maybe going to do is maybe help the racing product a little bit, because there might not be as much drag, as we have seen a lot of issues when it comes to next-gen car when it does come to drag. And I think finding a way to have less drag on these cars is really, really important. So I think the drag's been a major factor. Look at Super Speedway racing, for example. I think the drag has really unfortunately hurt the racing for the Super Speedway. So I think something like this coming into play, I think is certainly a very interesting move. But I also like a move like this when you look at the Louvers situation. We've seen this kind of Louvers used before, back, of course, in the Gen 6 days when they tested it during the All-Star race. But I'm very interested to see how this will play out, how this will work in a nutshell for the manufacturers. They'll get to decide what they do on Friday. I think it's going to be interesting to see how things play out when we do get to the track. Nonetheless, some interesting stuff around that, and kind of cool that they'll get the chance and opportunity to choose what kind of Louvers they want. I think it's interesting, and I think it's also kind of wild overall, in my honest opinion, that they've got to kind of choose what type of Louvers they're going to get to use. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Childress Racing. Now, Bob Pockrass noted this on social media. I believe it was during the NASCAR Cup Series race at Michigan. A really epic race, by the way. But he noted on the RCR haulers and a lot of other haulers as well that apparently a lot of the teams had to cover up a lot of different types of branding. One of those is alcohol brands. Nicotine brands have also been covered up on the RCR hauler. Casino brands, if they are not approved by Mexico, they will not be allowed to be shown. They'll be covered up. And same thing goes with firearm logos as well, kind of like the Winchester stuff, and I think Remington's also associated with RCR as well. So those have had to be covered up. The reason is because they do have regulations in Mexico that are a lot more stricter when it comes to sponsorships than you see in the United States, and that's why they're being covered up, unfortunately. I would not be surprised or shocked. I'm not exactly sure which sponsor Kyle Busch is going to have for this weekend in Mexico. Maybe we're going to get a new sponsor for Kyle Busch. Who knows at this point? So I don't think they've officially announced what exactly it is going to be. I have to think more than likely they're going to probably go with one of his sponsors like Cheddar's perhaps for the weekend. That's the one I would have to think they're going to use because that's the easiest one they can do. I mean, it's food for crying out loud. It doesn't have alcohol in the name among other things. So I think that is something to look at. I don't think it's just an RCR thing. Like I've mentioned, I think RFK has some alcohol brands that have to be covered up. I do believe the 2311 has some alcohol brands as well that do have to be covered up as well. In other companies like Chumba Casino, which is associate sponsor, I think that's going to have to be covered up on the 2311 banner. I think it's certainly interesting for sure that something like this has to be done, but Mexico does have different regulations when it comes to sponsorships compared to other parts of it. So you may see Kyle Busch in a Bear car that doesn't have a lot of sponsorship. It's going to be interesting to see what sponsors you do see at the event. There's been a lot of sponsors that have come from Mexico. You got Total Play that's sponsoring Carson, Osbar, of course, and some other companies as well coming in. Certainly interesting stuff and kind of wild stuff on the front. They've got to do stuff like this, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Frankie Munz. Now, Frankie Munz, of course, is competing full-time in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series for the Rayman brothers. And Frankie Munz had one of his better runs in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2025. He is able to score a top 15 finish and finish in 14th place at Michigan International Speedway, getting only his second top 15 finish of 2025. His only other finish that's been inside the top 15 was actually a top 10 finish after Park Kligerman got disqualified in the Truck Series race at Daytona. He got moved up inside the top 10 because of that. This was a solid run for Frankie. Now, unfortunately, on the final restart for Frankie Munz, he made a little bit of an unfortunate error and mistake that he says he's never made before. On the final restart, a second to last restart, Frankie Munz unfortunately failed to basically hit the gas pedal and was stuck in third gear, unfortunately. He said he's never done that before, and he made that mistake and lost a lot of track position. He said he had not made that mistake. He thought there'd be a chance he might get a top 5 or maybe even a top 10. If he doesn't make that mistake, we might be talking about a Frankie Munz getting a top 5 finish in the Truck Series, which again, he's only scored one top 10 in NASCAR Craftsman Truck competition. Despite that fact, I think Frankie had one of his better runs in the Truck Series. He showed some decent speed in the Truck Series race on Saturday. He ran top 30. He ran inside the lead lap majority of the event. And I think the car actually had some decent speed out on the racetrack. Unfortunately, he just made an unfortunate error and mistake there that cost him a shot at going to victory, or at least getting a really good finish. But a top 15 for the Ram brothers, that's going to be good on the owner's point side of things as well. Even though we've had a lot of races this year where it's been very difficult to even get full fields at this point, we might be seeing a change with that with the new manufacturer that's coming in to the Truck Series. Nonetheless, I think it is certainly interesting for Frankie to get a solid run. I hope Frankie can continue, having good runs because it has been a frustrating year for Frankie. If you ever heard him on the radio, you could tell he's been frustrated, angry, and not happy with the way things have been going over there. So I think that having good runs like this is a really big deal for Frankie, and I know that he's disappointed that he didn't get the finish he thinks he deserved, but I think he should be proud nonetheless that he did have a very, very good finish at the end of the day, and I'm just glad to see Frankie run well. It's been a frustrating season overall for Frankie, and I want to see the guy have success in this series, so it's good to see him finish inside the top 15. He didn't set the world on fire, but good to see him have a good run, and glad to see that he was able to finish inside the top 15, show some decent speed, good to see him get a solid finish at Michigan in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about backup cars. Now, during the NASCAR Cup Series race in Mexico City, if you actually were at the racetrack today, you probably saw a lot of stuff going on inside of the Truck Series garages and the Cup Series garages as well. So what was going on? Well, as I had heard, they were going ahead and loading up the backup cars, and they were loading up the cars for the upcoming NASCAR Cup and Xfinity races at Mexico City. Currently, at the time I'm recording this video, and probably by tomorrow, most of the haulers will be arriving at Laredo, Texas to get through customs and to get their trucks inside of customs by the time we get to Tuesday. They were loading up these backup cars that you're going to see at Mexico so they can get down to there as quick as possible. And I think that this is actually interesting. Now, here's how I feel about this whole thing. I personally do think that either there should have been an off week so they would have had time and opportunity to trek down there. I think they should have had an off week to get prepared for stuff like this. Or number two, they could have had a race a little bit closer to Mexico. I'm thinking maybe we could have done like COTA, for instance, maybe a little bit later in the season, though that might have been a little bit difficult. Maybe do something like Atlanta, perhaps. It's not as far as a trek as Michigan is, for example. Maybe you could have done something like a little bit more on the West Coast. We could have done something like, I don't know, not Kansas probably, because we had to move the season a little bit farther in the year. But I feel like that we should have had either an off week for both series to get the travel done and basically change up the schedule a little bit on that front. And I do think that we could have had a race in the Texas area. I think COTA would absolutely been perfect for that particular time to get it going, even though we're probably going to have, if we do have COTA next year, that's probably going to be early in the year because it was a very successful event. But I think that this was creating a lot of stuff. Now, the good news is weather wasn't a factor for the Cup Series race today, so this certainly wasn't a major issue that really played a role in getting everything down there. So at least everything's kind of getting sorted out at the moment. We don't even know what the entry lists are currently at the moment for the NASCAR Cup race, so I do think those are going to be coming very, very soon. But there's definitely some interesting stuff on that front as well, and glad to see those cars have been loaded up. They're on the way to Mexico right now. They're headed down there, and I'm glad to see things have been sorted out on that front. But I feel like something like this could have been sorted out a little bit sooner. I know that they've done a lot of work to get something like this done, but at the same token, same time, we could have been moving away a little bit quicker on this front and not had to be going here in the last minute and pushing things at the last minute, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson competed in the World of Outlaws race this past weekend, I believe, at Plymouth Raceway. Now, Kyle Larson actually was able to make it to the main event, and he did a really good job. He started up front, and Rico Brute was leading the race, and he actually would go on, I believe, to win the event. However, Kyle Larson would have a very scary crash during the World of Outlaws race. Around lap 10 of the event, Kyle Larson was chasing down Rico as they were coming through lap traffic, and unfortunately for Kyle Larson, he has a wheel that snaps off the race car. The car entirely breaks. He ends up flipping upside down, doing multiple somersaults, and the car is completely destroyed. The good news for Kyle Larson fans, including myself, Kyle Larson was okay. He got out of the car very, very quickly and wasn't hurt from the incident wreck. And they actually interviewed him after the incident had taken place. From what a lot of people that said that were watching the race, it seemed like maybe like a rear axle broke on the car, and the car unfortunately crashed. It has been a very tumultuous last couple weeks for Kyle Larson. You go back to the Indy NASCAR double. He tried to run the Indy 500, and he crashed during the Indy 500. Then he tried to go and win the Coke 600, had the lead, spins out, gets caught up in a crash. Nashville didn't go super well for him. He struggled a little bit there. He did salvage a top 10 finish and didn't overall have the best speed in Michigan, but he still was able to recover and get a top 5 finish. Even when they're not perfect cars, Larson is still wheeling that thing to finish inside the top 5. I've seen a lot of people, though, making the stupid joke about Larson being the best driver. Well, I know some of those people were joking on social media, but I think people generally think that Larson was at fault for a car breaking. Like, Kyle Larson is not at fault for when a car breaks entirely, that he doesn't really have control over, unfortunately. So for Larson, it was very unfortunate. I think Larson, of course, he's still going to be focused on doing dirt racing. We all know, of course, he's not going to be attempting to do that supercar race that was in the cards for this year. There was talk he was going to do it at the end of the year and go run the supercar event with that wild card entry in Australia during the weekend at Adelaide for the season finale of this series of supercars. So I think for Larson, it's good to see he's okay. Glad to see he wasn't seriously hurt from the crash because those wrecks can be really dangerous and they can be really, really scary. So good to see Kyle Larson okay after that, and glad to see he did not get hurt from the crash, and good to see that he was good to go to race for the Cup race. Had a solid day, finished inside the top 5, didn't show the best speed, but did have a solid day, all things considered, and put together a decent performance in the race. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Amazon Prime. Now, if you've been watching the NASCAR Cup coverage for Amazon Prime this year, you have been really enjoying fantastic broadcasts. I think all 3 broadcasts so far this year for Amazon Prime have been very, very good. But it was noted on Friday by Adam Stern that ratings indicate that NASCAR on the platform of Prime gets competition from the NBA, especially when it comes to the younger demographic, and the younger demographic is competing for both platforms. One thing we have noticed with the Amazon Prime coverage for NASCAR is while, yes, the overall viewership has been down for NASCAR in a nutshell, we have seen an increase in not just 18 to 49 demographic, but we also seen an increase in the 18 to 34 demographic. These are the two generations of markets that NASCAR is looking after currently at the moment. Because the average age of race fan in NASCAR going into the Amazon broadcast have been 62 years old for the races that have been on FS1 and have been on Fox. We have seen a drop from 62 years of age down to 55 to 56 years, which is some of the youngest years we have seen for NASCAR in about a decade or so. It is very important that NASCAR tries to get that younger demographic in the sport. If you want to have younger fans for the sport to survive long term. And while the overall viewership, like I mentioned, has been down a little bit, they've been able to attract a lot of a younger demographic, which again is the most important thing. You got to find a way to get that younger demographic to be involved in the sport. So again, the sport can survive long term because right now the sport with the older fan base, they don't have a sustainable fan base currently at the moment, especially when the fan base is a lot older. So the most important thing is to try to track that younger demographic so the sport can be in the best position long term. And I think that they're doing a really good job attracting that younger demographic. There's a lot of younger fans, people like my age, for example, that are on Amazon Prime compared to other things like regular TV or cable, for example. It's clear as day that cable is no longer the top thing anymore, and I think that most races, I think personally, should either be Amazon Prime at this point, or they need to be on traditional TV like Fox and NBC and all that kind of stuff, and the CW like the Xfinity Series has been doing. Look at the Xfinity CW ratings. Those have been really good this year. They had only their first race this year that was under 1 million viewers, but generally the viewership for the Xfinity Series has been very good. I think that younger demographic is very important. Yes, of course, you are going to have that competition from the NBA and the WNBA as well, but I think that the more younger people the sport can get, the better the sport is going to be off, and I think that's the most important thing. Glad to see we're getting a lot of those younger fans. I think that's a good thing, and I think that's generally a really huge thing for the sport overall, and I think it's great to see, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brazil. Now, we talked a little bit about the story on the channel earlier this week. I believe it was back on Friday, I'm pretty sure. But there was some conversation around the future of Brazil, and Steve Fzen sat down with one of the people that works at Motorsports.com to discuss the future of NASCAR going to Brazil. There were some conversations, of course, earlier this year that NASCAR was looking to maybe go to Brazil or Interlagos for the 2026 Clash. However, it seems like those talks have died down over the course of the last couple months. And noted in this article, and Adam Stern quoted this as well, Steve Fzen says, "I don't know when we'll get to Brazil. I like to see it happen. We need all the parties to come together for something like this to happen. We're still working to try to make it happen. We need everybody to come together at this point." Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, there was a lot of talk and conversation that they were looking maybe to go down to Brazil for the race to have the Clash in 2026 as NASCAR continues to try to go international, which we could have had a potential possibility of having 3 different countries on NASCAR schedules. Of course, we do know that NASCAR will be going to Mexico City for this year and potentially next year as well. We've heard rumors and speculation NASCAR might be going to Canada for the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in the Montreal area. And now you've got conversations about going to Interlagos, but it sounds like right now at this particular moment and point, those talks have died down. According to this article, it is expected that more than likely next year that we will be going back to Bowman Gray for the Clash in 2026, which I gotta say, I would rather see the race at Bowman Gray. I think the race at Bowman Gray was exceptional, especially when you look at short track standards, where the short track races, in my opinion, have not been that good this year or haven't been as good in recent years. I think Bowman Gray put on a good show. It was like North Wilkesboro, for example, where I think the racing was really, really solid for standards, especially in recent years. So I do personally believe that we should try to grow our sport domestically, but I know that NASCAR and Steve Fzen are very keen on trying to get races out there internationally, which I think is very important. I think by 2030, you're not just going to see one international date. I think there's a chance the Cup Series will be up in Montreal for 2027, and maybe in the next couple years, maybe down the road we go back to Japan like we did in the late 1990s. Maybe we go to the other countries in Europe. I don't want to go to Saudi Arabia. There's been talk about maybe going to Saudi Arabia. That would be the last place that I would really want to go to at this point, but they're talking, of course, about going to Saudi Arabia. So I think it's going to certainly be interesting to see where they end up going for 2026, and maybe down the road if we go to Brazil. I think the earliest we would go to Brazil right now is like 2027 or something like that, maybe 2028, whenever their contract gets done with the stuff in Mexico. So we're probably going to be in Mexico once again in 2026. I'm interested to see what else happens with the schedule. Interesting stuff around that, and hopefully we do see some racing in different countries in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chicagoland Speedway. Now, there has been a lot of talk about Chicagoland Speedway and potentially being on the NASCAR Cup schedule as early as 2026. And one person that is very much in support of Chicagoland Speedway returning is Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney wants to see Chicagoland Speedway return to the NASCAR Cup schedule. He said the racing's been really, really good at that track, and the racing always was fantastic at Chicagoland Speedway, and it deserves to be on the schedule. I 100% agree with Ryan Blaney on this. I think when it comes especially to the next-gen car, the type of racing that the next-gen car does really well at is the bigger intermediate tracks, the 1.5 miles and the 2-mile racetracks. Chicagoland fits in that mold. But not only that, it wasn't just the next-gen car that I think would put on great racing. The Xfinity Series always put on good racing at that track. The Gen 6 car put on really good racing. Even the 550 package, where most tracks, it did not do very, very well. It did very well on the 550 package. And I think that Chicagoland Speedway needs to be on there. Now, obviously, we know that 2025 currently at the moment is the last year of the current contract with the Chicago Street Courts. And there has been a lot of talk and speculation that going into the 2026 year, that we will not be back at the Chicago Street Courts. There have been rumors that maybe they moved that date to San Diego for 2026, but it seems like those talks have kind of slowed down at this point, and many do not think they're going to be bringing San Diego on the schedule, at least for the 2026 season, and that might get pushed to 2027, meaning we might have the first year without a street course race, at least in a couple years. I would definitely love to see Chicago come back on the schedule. The racing was always very, very good, and the type of racing that I think NASCAR should be striving for at the moment right now is the intermediate tracks, because in my opinion, the intermediate racing has just been very good and really, really fun to watch. And I think it would be a really bad move if they stop bringing intermediate tracks on the schedule, at least for now. Now, some are going to say, do you want Kentucky back on the schedule? No, absolutely not. Kentucky Speedway, I know people say Kentucky be good with the next-gen car. I know we haven't tried it, but I personally don't want to see Kentucky on the schedule. I just don't think the racing would generally be really, really good at that track. For me, I think Chicagoland, though, absolutely is the perfect track to go to at this particular moment. Again, I think the racing would be really fun. I think it'd be really, really good. And I think there'd be a lot of drivers who'd be in support. Yes, the track definitely down the road needs to be repaved. There's still some stuff that does need to be done with the racetrack. But I think right now that it's just a fantastic facility. It's a really, really good racetrack. And it does need to be on the schedule in 2026. I hope it does happen. Again, if they don't go back to the street course next year, I think this needs to be on the schedule. It sounds like they are talking about it. And I really hope it does happen. So I think Chicago deserves to be on the schedule because it's a great track and a great facility, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Cory LaJoie. Now, Cory LaJoie made some interesting comments this past weekend in the media center. Of course, Cory LaJoie does have a 9-race schedule in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series with Spire Motorsports. But remember, earlier this year in February, it was Bob Pockrass who had asked a question to Cory about why he decided not to go full-time in the number 19 truck for McAnally Hilgeman Racing. Because remember, he had an opportunity to drive that truck. Well, Cory basically said, and was getting a little bit frustrated, Bob Pockrass questioning him, he basically said, why would I want to go down and race in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series full-time? Do I want to pump my ego up and basically in front of 12 people in the grandstands? No, I want to go race on Sundays and be very, very competitive. Since my sponsors are going to see that I am in the NASCAR Cup Series, they'll be more focused on that. Now, Cory LaJoie did say this past weekend that he does regret saying that. He also said he was very frustrated because apparently he was doing a 5-day fast during that time and was frustrated with Bob Pockrass' question. Now, I got to say this about the Bob Pockrass question about why he decided not to run on basically full-time in trucks. Bob was just doing his job at that particular moment and point, and I feel like Cory LaJoie could have been a little more professional on that front right there. I don't think Bob Pockrass should be blamed. You got to blame yourself for basically not taking that opportunity. He probably wouldn't have asked you that question if you would have taken the opportunity to go full-time. But I also get to understand, right, because that truck had lost Charles Denike, who, of course, is working with Bubba Wallace this year. And then, of course, you have, a lot of other things like Christian Eckes, who moved up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series with Cory Racing, which, let's be honest, has not been going really good so far for Christian Eckes at this particular moment. But for Cory LaJoie, this is a great opportunity to work with Spire. He actually almost won the Truck Series race yesterday and ended up finishing inside the top 10. But he made a mistake and could have won. I think LaJoie needs to make the best of this opportunity because I know Cory LaJoie would definitely love to be back in the NASCAR Cup Series down the road, but he's also been given a great opportunity here to work on TV. And say what you want to say, I think Cory LaJoie has actually been very, very enjoyable to listen to on TV and very fun to listen to. He's done a really good job. He does a really good job behind the camera. I get people don't think he's got a really good driving career among other things, but I think his broadcasting career is just getting started. Now, I think Cory LaJoie obviously would love to have a full-time Cup Series career once again down the road, but you also got to look at the age side of things. I believe Cory LaJoie will be 35 years old in 2026, because I believe he was born in 1991, so LaJoie is going to be in his mid-30s at that point. I think if he had the opportunity to be full-time in the Truck Series, I think he'd take it. I just think there were a lot of people that were caught off guard with those comments he made, and they felt like that those comments that Cory LaJoie made were very unnecessary. And I think the fast comments, I don't know why he brought up a 5-day fast. I just still don't think there's any excuse to get mad at a reporter for asking you questions. I don't think the question, honestly, was that stupid, in all honesty. And I think that was actually a very important question that probably does need to be asked. Overall for LaJoie, the main focus is do a good job with Spire. The truck did not have overall the best speed out there. I don't think it's a Cory issue. We've seen troubles for Kyle Busch in that truck, BJ McLeod struggling, even Kyle Larson couldn't win in that truck. So if those guys are struggling, that says a lot about that truck at this moment. For Cory, this is a great opportunity, though. I really hope he can make the best of it. I didn't agree with the comments that he made, but I respect his opinion in some things. I just think the comments he made were a little bit unnecessary and uncalled for back then, but it seems like he's regretted, which I do respect him for regretting those comments that he made earlier this year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ricky Senos Jr. and Carson Osbar. Now, one of the big stories and talk about that's been going on earlier this week is what happened between Ricky Senos Jr. and Carson Osbar during the NASCAR Cup Series race at Nashville Super Speedway. On lap 10 of stage 2 of the race, Carson Osbar and Ricky Senos Jr. battling for around 15th and 20th position in the race. They both were having decent performances. Carson had a really big run on Ricky Senos Jr. Senos does come down the racetrack a little bit, but Senos basically doesn't think that Carson Osbar is going to completely send it in the corner. He goes in there, Carson makes contact with Ricky, ends up spinning him out into the outside wall. And Ricky Senos Jr. was justifiably not very happy with Carson Osbar, and according to conversations that were had earlier this week, apparently Ricky Senos Jr. was told by a lot of people in the garage they're not very happy with Carson Osbar's performance, and many people in the industry told him that he probably should have waited for Carson Osbar like they did with Kyle Busch when, of course, he got into a fight with Kyle Busch at North Wilkesboro last year. Now, apparently, they did have a conversation earlier this week. Carson Osbar and Ricky did mention that they apparently had a very productive conversation, and it seemed like they kind of agreed to disagree on some things, but Ricky understands where Carson is coming from. Obviously, there's a lot of people in the industry that do like Carson Osbar a lot. I'm a fan of Carson Osbar. Yes, I have been a little critical of Carson Osbar on this channel in the past, but you cannot deny that Carson Osbar has a lot of speed right now. He has been one of the fastest cars over the last couple weeks. His cars have been very, very strong, and I think he has a really good chance of possibly of getting that first career NASCAR Cup Series win. Now, Ryan Blaney kind of defended Ricky Senos Jr. a little bit, which I think a lot of people thought was a very unpopular move for Ryan Blaney to do that, but I don't think that Ricky Senos Jr. was in the wrong for getting a little bit ticked off and a little bit frustrated with the way that Carson raced him, because Carson has had a tendency at times to do and get a little bit over-aggressive. But at the same time, I'm glad to see they both were able to reach out to each other and able to have a conversation about this kind of stuff, because I think that it's important for Carson to have those conversations. And I think about the aggression side of things. They kind of brought it up during the pre-race show, and they feel like Carson might not care, and Carson has a lot of speed right now. I think a lot of people compare Carson Osbar to young Kyle Larson at the moment, because Kyle Larson drove an underfunded car with Chip Ganassi Racing, did the best in that equipment, and got himself a couple wins with that team. I think Carson is on the verge of picking up wins in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, and I don't think he really cares about all the noise on the Cup side. I think the goal is to go out there and win races. That's the most important thing for Carson Osbar at this point, and he's been, again, doing a very solid and really, really good job with the Spire organization this season. He has a right to be aggressive because it's been leading to a lot of success this year. Got to give him credit where credit is due. But I think if he can calm that aggression down and refine that aggression, I think he's going to have a lot more success down the road. I think for Carson, I'm glad to see they had a productive conversation. I'm glad to see this whole thing's been wrapped up. It seems like if things don't continue between these two when it comes to contact and other things, I don't think we're going to see more problems. which is a positive thing that can happen here, because I think for Carson, he wants to go out there, win races at this point, and get victories for Spire Motorsports and get him on the winner's circle at this point. Nonetheless, glad to see they had a conversation about what happened, and now the full focus going forward for Carson is to try to win his first race of the year, and for Ricky to pick up his 5th career Cup Series win. We'll see what happens, and we'll see what happens for the guys going forward in 2026 and 25 as well. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 3 major stories in today's episode as we are talking about Honda. Now, we're going to talk about the big Ram story that was announced earlier today, as Ram, of course, is returning. But according to an article that was released by Adam Stern earlier today, NASCAR is very close to a deal with another car maker to join the racing series. John Probst said he was one of the higher-ups in the sport. Honda, according to Adam Stern, is eyeing an entry in NASCAR competition, and according to what many people have been saying, it sounds like Honda is the most likely manufacturer to become the 5th OEM in NASCAR competition. Obviously, we know more than likely that Dodge will be returning to the NASCAR Cup Series in 2027 or in 2028. And of course, now you have to ask yourself with the Honda rumors. We've been hearing rumors about Honda for a very, very long time. But I think that it seems like those rumors have been picking up a lot of steam in the last couple of months. And really, those rumors began last year. We had heard some speculation last year that Honda had been very unhappy with the way things are going in IndyCar currently at the moment. And with them adding the hybrid system, there's still a lot of unhappiness over at the Honda group currently at the moment right now. Now, obviously, I think a big reason why we have the hybrids in IndyCar currently at the moment right now is because Honda wanted them, and they were going to jump ship from IndyCar and break their contract early if they basically continue not bringing the hybrids into the sport. There is still a very likely possibility, by the way, that even with adding the hybrids, even with listening to what Honda wanted, there is still a lot of talk right now that Honda could end up leaving IndyCar at the end of the 2026 season, because their contract ends at the end of next year. And there are still a lot of people that don't even know what the future that is going to be in IndyCar currently at the moment. That's why there's been a lot of talk recently about them maybe coming over to NASCAR in the next couple of years. Now, obviously, if Honda is to join the sport, they would have to wait a couple of years, because for a body to be approved for the 2026 season, those have had to been approved, I believe, by the end of last year in September, I'm pretty sure. And then for 2027, if they were to get into the Cup Comp Series in 2027, the earliest they would probably be able to come into the sport and get a thing is the end of this year. They have until September, and if they want to look 2028, they have another year and a half. I think the earliest we could see Honda come into sport, if they do come into NASCAR, is 2026. I think that is the most likely opportunity there. And let's say they do come. What teams could switch over? Well, right now, I think there's very limited options at this point. I think many people are going to link Trackhouse Race into that, but I'll talk about Trackhouse and the other story here in just a short little bit. I think of other teams, of course, like Legacy. Legacy Motor Club, of course, had conversations with Scott Dixon about maybe entering Scott Dixon in the Daytona 500 in the not-so-distant future. I know Scott Dixon has expressed interest in wanting to run the Daytona 500 this year, so maybe we see that happen, or maybe we see Chip Ganassi Racing come back to NASCAR for the first time since 2021 and maybe make a comeback around 26 or 27. I mean, Chip Ganassi said it earlier this year on the Happy Harvick podcast. He's not entirely ruling out the possibility. He didn't say he's going to do it, but he is not entirely ruling out the possibility of bringing Chip Ganassi Racing back to NASCAR competition, which I think that'd be awesome if they can make a comeback and return. But I think it's really exciting also that there is talk and conversations about Honda coming in. Because again, there's been rumors about Honda coming in since the early 2000s. I think even going back to the late 90s when NASCAR did race in Japan. I think they were really behind the Twin-Ring Motegi construction in the late 1990s. For me, though, I think it's interesting because you can get a lot of different teams in here. Maybe you get the Aston Martin program from Formula One to get involved. I think that would certainly be interesting. But I look at this for Honda. I think this is a huge deal if they come in. And we may not just have one OEM coming in, but two. And we may have as many as up to 5 OEMs. And the competition is so important for these manufacturers that they're really clamoring for it. The big goal of the next-gen car has always been to attract new manufacturers. And it seems like we are getting those new manufacturers in the sport, which to me is really exciting and really great to see, because we need to see new manufacturers in the sport for the sport, I believe, to really, really grow. And I think Honda coming in is a really, really huge deal if it does end up happening. The earliest, like I said, though, they come in is a couple years from now. The earliest I would see them likely coming in is like 28 or 29. Maybe by the end of the decade they enter in. And I think there'll probably be some new teams that are in the NASCAR Cup Series at that point. But you also got to think about the charters as well. We don't even know what the future of the charter system is going to be long term because they may even go away at the end of this year. So I think that's certainly a little bit of an interesting wrinkle that really could come into play and really come into effect. We'll have to kind of wait and see what happens in regards to Honda and their future in the sport. But again, it sounds like the talks and conversations are heating up currently at the moment. I think it's really exciting for sure, and I really hope we see Honda come into sports. I think it could be a really, really big deal for growth and potential development of this series. I think it's some exciting stuff, and I really hope we do get to see Honda join up in the sport in the next couple of years because I think it could be a really huge deal for the sport if Honda is that manufacturer. I think there's other manufacturers look at too. Maybe look at like a European manufacturer like the Volkswagen companies, maybe something like that. Maybe Hyundai comes in. There's been talk about Hyundai coming in, so maybe they come in. Who knows at this point, but I'm interested to see what other manufacturers come in. We're not going to see Cadillac, of course, but it's interesting to see that it sounds like a new manufacturer might be on their way into the sport, which I think is really exciting in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story in today's episode as we're talking about 23XI Racing from our Motorsports and the NASCAR lawsuit. Now, it was announced earlier this week on Thursday that NASCAR was able to win their appeal against 23XI Racing and Firmer Motorsports on the preliminary injunction. Let's go back to earlier this year. Back in December 2024, of course, 23XI Racing and Front Row were basically needing to have a preliminary injunction to compete for the season as charter organizations. There was a lot of talk about the potential possibility of the drivers in the organization, Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace, of course, Todd Gillen, Zane Smith, Riley Herbst, Noah Gragson, and I believe also Corey Heim all had provisions in their contracts with their teams that if they did not have a charter for the 2025 season, they could walk and join another organization for the year. So the original judge, Kenneth Bell, had granted the preliminary injunction. Then a couple months later, they had the hearing in early May, I believe it was May 9th or May 10th of last month. They had the hearing, and it was announced on Thursday that they had lost a preliminary injunction hearing, and NASCAR has basically won the appeal. What this means that in the next 3 weeks, there is a very good chance and possibly if 23XI Racing and Firmer Motorsports do appeal, they might extend a little bit longer on that. But if they do not appeal within the next 3 weeks, the decision would be made, and a week after it's officially confirmed, they will go into effect. So in about 3 weeks from now, on June 26th, which is about 18 or 19 days away from now, that order can officially go into effect. Now, what does this mean? Well, both 23XI Racing and Firmer Motorsports could very likely lose their charters in the next couple of weeks, meaning that all the drivers could be open cars for the remainder of the season. And earlier this weekend at Michigan Speedway, they were asked questions about the situation. First up, Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace basically kind of had a no-comment situation on it by basically saying that he doesn't really have a comment at this point. He said, you're not really going to get an answer from me. My main focus is trying to run really well in Michigan, which to be fair, Bubba Wallace had a really good run in Michigan, ran inside the top 10, got a really good performance. But Bubba technically does have a contract through 2026 with 23XI Racing at the moment. But Bubba's main focus at this time is to try to, of course, win races and contend for some wins. And then, of course, Tyler Reddick also kind of said the same thing and reiterated the same thing as well. He basically said that I'm not going to really answer this question. He said it a lot more politely than Bubba Wallace did, it seemed like. But Tyler Reddick basically said, I don't have any comment at this time. We're going to have to ask the legal team and our lawyers exactly about that. Denny Hamlin, of course, who is the owner of 23XI Racing and one of the owners of one of the teams, he basically came out and said that they're not surprised by the decision, it seemed like, and he also said that for the whole entire lawsuit altogether, they still feel like they've got a really strong case in regards to the lawsuit. They feel like they still can go ahead and win the overall lawsuit altogether. There's also something else that is coming up very, very soon, and this involves the other organizations. There's another appeal that is supposed to happen. Of course, NASCAR has filed a counterclaim against 23XI Racing and Firmer Motorsports. That hearing is actually supposed to take place, I believe, on June 17th, so about a week and a half from now at this time, the week after Mexico going into Pocono. They're supposed to have a hearing in about a week or so from now on that. And according to the provision that's been presented, they want the other teams, that 23XI and Firmer want the other teams to get involved. The other teams that signed the charter agreement, RFK Racing, who of course has Ryan Preece, Brad Keselowski, Chris Buescher, Hendrick Motorsports, that has Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, William Byron, Alex Bowman, Trackhouse, that has Daniel Suarez, Shane Van Gisbergen, and Rosch Chastain. Other teams that are in there like again, JGR, Legacy Motor Club, who signed the charter agreement for the new one, and other teams like Team Penske, they have already filed against this, and they do not want to be involved in the lawsuit. But if it does come to effect, those teams might have to get involved. And Brad Keselowski really did not have any comments on that front as well. He kind of said that that's kind of up to what the situation is at this particular moment in point, and that's something that we're going to be following and paying attention to closely. This is definitely a really big deal, though, going back to the original ruling on 2011 in front row, potentially not having charters in the not-so-distant future. Because obviously, they're currently suing NASCAR at this particular point. When the ruling came out on Thursday of last week, Judge basically said you cannot have the cake and eat it too. Kind of went through that basically saying you can't go ahead and sue NASCAR and then get all the charter benefits. That's what the judge is basically saying. Now, at this point, I think there was a good reason why those teams were able to get the charters for the respective season. And remember, that was just for 2025. There is a mediation thing that is also coming up as well very, very soon. I believe that's going to be taking place on August 1st or August 2nd, I'm pretty sure, is when the mediation is supposed to take place. So we could get a resolution in the next month and a half or so, but many people do believe that this is going to go all the way to trial, which is set for December 1st of this year. So technically, less than 6 months away from now is when the official court date is going to take place, and the trial is going to be set. Now, the decision on that trial is not going to be set on the original day, but it's going to go for a very, very long time, and we could be going into 2026 if things do get extended. If the other teams do have to get involved, this could extend this whole situation, a lawsuit, all the way to 2026. As of right now, 2011 has stated, and the team has stated that they do plan to compete regardless if they are open teams or charter teams for the season. But it could have a big effect on silly season because, again, there are drivers who are under contract who do require to have charters for their respective seasons. And if they don't have a charter, they can just walk away and join another program. Now, could we see Front Row maybe drop out of the lawsuit altogether and go with the settlement? I think they certainly are a team that might. But 2311 Racing, if they lose Front Row, that's going to hurt their case in general and altogether. Having two organizations involved does help a little bit. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of this whole lawsuit plays out because I think it's still very wide open on exactly who is going to win the lawsuit because originally it seemed like NASCAR had control, then teams had control when the new judge came in, and now it seems like NASCAR has gone back to control. I do expect that you're going to see the teams appeal the decision that came out. I do expect an appeal to be coming very, very soon, and I think that will be announced in the not-so-distant future that is going to happen. That will extend the time it will have their charters, and that appeal will be heard a little bit later. So we might be not having a decision until July or August or something like that. Outside of the Chicago street course, I think every other races should be fine if they are open teams. But again, it's very likely at this moment they're going to lose their charters at the end of the year, which is going to be unfortunate, but it sounds like the charters might be going away for 2011 Front Row if NASCAR makes a decision on that front. And now we're going to head on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Dodge and Ram. As after weeks of speculation and months of speculation, it has been finally officially announced earlier today that Ram and Dodge will be returning to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026. It has been expected they are going to have 4 to 6 teams in the 2026 season, according to what Bob Pockers has reported. Now, we'll talk about the Cup program here in just a short little bit and talk about what teams might be getting involved with the new Ram program as well. But this has been obviously the worst kept secret in the industry. We go all the way back to the beginning of this year. During Daytona Week, it was reported by Chris Knight from CatchFence.com that, of course, it was expected that Dodge and Ram were likely going to be having a program for the 2026 season. Drawings and renderings have been surfaced and have been brought in. And, of course, it was expected that documents have been surfacing as well. We continue to get reports from Jordan Bianchi and other people as well, and more bombshells continue to come out about a potential Cup program for the 2027 or 2028 season. Now, this is a really, really big deal because Dodge, well, not Dodge yet, but Ram has not been in NASCAR competition since 2012. Of course, they were associated with Dodge back then. They have kind of separated from the Dodge entity at this time, even though they're still technically a Dodge Ram at this point. We'll get to that here in just a second. But they basically have not been getting support in NASCAR since 2012. At the time, I believe Brad Keselowski Racing was a Dodge team at the time, or a Ram team at the time, because Brad Keselowski, of course, was driving for Dodge at Penske, and Penske, of course, won the championship in the Cup Series in 2012 with the Dodge program. So this is the first time we've seen him. Now, obviously, we had the zombie Dodges and trucks up until like 2016 or 2017, but it's the first time in 13 years they've been in truck competition. This is a really big deal, and this is the fourth OEM that we have been expecting to come in. We have not had a new or old OEM be in the sport since 2007. We haven't had a new OEM join in nearly 20 years. So this is a really, really big deal. Now, let's get to the 4 and 6 team situation. They know the 4 to 6 teams altogether. This does not mean there will be 4 to 6 teams. This does not entirely mean that you're going to see 4 organizations or 6 organizations. What this means more than likely is there going to be either 4 trucks out on the track under the Dodge umbrella or 6 teams under the Dodge umbrella. I mean, there's probably going to be at least a couple organizations with Dodge, but you're probably not going to see like a bunch of organizations out there. Now, the next big question we have to ask ourselves is what teams could be getting involved with this program? Well, Adam Stern and Bob Pockerson noted 3 interesting teams that might be getting involved. One of them is GMS Racing. We have heard a lot of speculation that GMS Racing may be the factory team and might be the team that could be switching over to the Dodge program for 2026. We've heard about this rumor a couple months back. It was reported, I think, from the NASCAR Nostalgia account that GMS Racing had been the likely team that was going to go over to Dodge if they came in. Spencer Gallagher had denied those comments. He, of course, does work with GMS, but there's been rumors that GMS Racing could be making a return. They have not been in NASCAR Craftsman truck competition since 2023 when they left the series. Of course, at the time, Rosch Group, Grant and Finger were driving for the program. It would be a huge deal if GMS could come in and be a Dodge organization. It'd be a really big deal. The other team that's interesting is Nice Motorsports. Now, Nice Motorsports being the team would be interesting. They, of course, are one of the teams that is one of the top dogs. Well, they're not one of the top dogs. They're like the second Chevy team. McAnally, Hilgeman Racing, Aspire Motorsports are a little bit ahead of them in performance, and I don't believe Nice has a Chevrolet development plan at this moment. I don't believe Matt Mills, like when Rosch drives or Caden Honeycutt drives or any of those guys in the team, they don't, or Bailey Curry for that matter, none of them have basically a Chevy pipeline. They're all under contract with the Nice program, and Nice Motorsports going over would be certainly interesting considering we may also see like Trackhouse Racing, for instance, go to Dodge. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But the other one we keep hearing is Rhett Jones Racing. Rhett Jones Racing used to be a Dodge team in ARCA many, many years ago in the early 2010s. And we keep hearing that Cletus McFarland might be involved in Dodge in some way, shape, or form. Now, Cletus has kind of denied a little bit about the Ram program a little bit. He said he was not involved in the announcement today. This does not indicate that he is not involved at all, but the fact that he keeps getting brought up multiple times tells me there might be some truth to Cletus maybe being involved. Cletus has been rumored that he might move up to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026, at least part-time. I don't think Cletus is going to go full-time at this point. I don't think it makes sense for him to be a full-time driver in trucks next year. So I think if he does move up, it's probably going to just be for at least a part-time stint. I don't think he goes full-time at this moment. I think it's going to be a part-time stint if he does move up. But Rhett Jones Racing would be certainly interesting. Now, one team that I thought might be going over there is ThorSport Racing because it's the last year of their Ford contract, but it doesn't sound like, according to Bob and other reporters, that ThorSport is one of the teams rumored right now. So I think ThorSport will likely stay with Ford at this moment. Maybe they re-up their contract with Ford. We'll have to kind of see if their performance does get better if they stay with Ford, because Ford doesn't really have a lot of teams at the moment. So they probably want to keep them in the Ford umbrella. That does make a lot of sense if they do stick around. But let's get to the final thing, the Dodge side of things. Now, the owner of the Ram program, Tom Kalinis, I believe is the guy's name, I'm pretty sure, who took over back with the Stellantis brand not too long ago in the United States. He said that as of right now, we are only focused on the Ram program at this time, but we are looking at a Dodge program down the road. Again, there's been speculation that Dodge could return to the NASCAR Cup Series in 2027, though that might be a little bit ambitious. Something, it might be 2028, they go to Cup. But their long-term goal is to have a Cup program. And many have probably been asking about the secondary series. I would think if they're focused on Cup, they're probably going to be going to Xfinity as well. So expect them to be in all 3 series when they do go ahead and join up. Now, what teams could go over to Dodge if they go Cup racing? Well, I think a lot of people eye Trackhouse Racing. Trackhouse Racing is obviously a team that's currently in a contract technically with Chevrolet, but there's a lot of people that do think that they are going to jump ship and they're going to jump to a new manufacturer. Why? Well, a big reason for that is because Trackhouse, they're not the number one team. And I look very similar to an organization that was a Chevy team many years ago. Joe Gibbs Racing. They were the second or third team in the Chevrolet camp. They were behind Hendrick, and they were kind of on the same level as Richard Childress Racing. They were having success, but not the same success as Hendrick. They went over to Toyota when they joined Cup in 2008, and guess what happened? They became one of the top teams and have been able to have a lot of success in NASCAR Cup competition since then. I think Trackhouse would be the most logical sense to go to Dodge. They're the number one team that's not at the top level right now, and I think you look at the performance, I think they want to switch over. And if they get Rosch, Van Gisbergen, maybe Connor Zilch and Suarez, that'd be a really huge deal. Some are also going to bring up Kaulig Racing, and Kaulig is very logical here. Kaulig Racing, the team that many believe could switch to a new manufacturer. If like Honda comes in, they could also switch there. I think Kaulig wants to be a top-level team. They have never been a top-level team in any of the series, so I think them going over would be logical. Some mentioned Legacy Motor Club. I think Legacy is one to watch out for as a dark horse at this point, but I think there also is a good chance we see them go over in the future. And I saw someone mention Team Penske in my comments. Team Penske has an integrated contract with Ford. They've got a long-term deal with Ford, plus they've got teams under the development umbrella like the Wood Brothers in front row, so I just do not see that happening and being a case where they go ahead and switch away from Ford. They're probably going to stay with Ford, but I'm interested to see if when they come to Cup, that's going to be the more intriguing part at this particular moment. But today is a really exciting day to see that Ram is coming back and the Stellantis is back in the sport is a huge deal. And I'm very excited to see what teams can get that manufacturer support and can be very competitive. And I'm also intrigued to see what drivers they're going to have. I mean, if you want to kind of go bold at this point, get Haley Deegan maybe part of the Dodge program, that would certainly be interesting, even though she's got a Ford contract. That'd be interesting if you want to go for the influencer side of things like it's mentioned. They also talk about like 20 to 8 million followers. I guess that's all across the world. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's a big day nonetheless, and glad to see that Ram is coming back to NASCAR competition. A massive and major day for motorsports as a whole to see them back in the sport for the first time in a very long time. So that is going to today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Turn notifications on so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and it's for me on Patreon as well. Let's go to below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Your thoughts about Ram returning to NASCAR in 26. Let me your thoughts in the comments below. And do you think that 2011 front row lose their charters altogether? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. Tomorrow on the channel, we're going to see the interest for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Mexico City. We also will likely have the Xfinity Series entry list as well, but I'm not entirely sure at this point. Then on Wednesday, we'll have a NASCAR news video discussing news over the course of the last couple days, and we're going to have the race picks for the race at Mexico City. We might do a preview for Mexico City. I'm not sure at this point. We also are going to have, of course, race picks for the Cup race at Mexico and the paint scheme video as well. Friday, we'll have a NASCAR news video. Might do reactions to practice, but I'm not sure at this point. And if any other major news break, we'll discuss it live. We'll talk about people like Haley Deegan, Van Gisbergen, Cards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Junior Motorsports, Sam Mayer, Sheldon Creed, Cletus McFarland, Dodge, Honda, all the good stuff we talk about on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.